So the first thing I'm saying to Australian companies is to take a long-term view about Indonesia. Some companies pull out at the first hurdle. It may be about discovering incompatibility with a partner or a distributor, but perseverance is the key. And then, of course, working with trusted sources of advice, like Austrade, like the Australian-Indonesia Business Council, like Katalis, work with those institutions. And secondly, we need a mindset shift about Indonesia. As I said, it's evolved dramatically since the 1990s, since the Asian financial crisis. I need to make sure people are aware of how much Indonesia has changed and the incredible efforts that have been taken by the Indonesian government to strengthen its economic and political institutions to attract investors. For example, things like the Indonesian Investment Authority, now Antara, very, very good reforms that make it easy to do business.
You're listening to the Katalis Podcast.
Welcome to the Katalis Podcast, brought to you by the IA-CEPA Economic Cooperation Program Katalis in Jakarta. I'm Sondang Sirait.
And I'm Robbie Gaspar. How are you, Sondang?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you? You've been traveling a lot, so great to catch you in time for this final episode, Robbie.
And so am I, Sondang, and I'm so excited to see the momentum keep building between Australia and Indonesia.
Exactly. Did you realize this year marks 5 years since the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or the IA-CEPA, came into force? This is a landmark deal that unlocks trade, investment, and collaboration between Indonesia and Australia. So that said, it's the perfect time to ask, what have we achieved and what more is possible?
We're excited to be joined by someone who is uniquely placed to answer that question, Professor Jennifer Westacott AC. As Australia's business champion under the Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040, Professor Westacott is working to help deepen Australia's business ties with Indonesia. A leading voice in strategy, reform and inclusive growth, she brings a long history of working in business engagement and strategy. She previously served as Chief Executive of the Business Council of Australia and is currently the Chancellor of Western Sydney University. And in June 2025, she was awarded Australia's highest honour, Companion of the Order of Australia, recognising her outstanding service to business and higher education.
Professor Westacott, welcome to the Katalis Podcast, and thanks for being here to celebrate this important milestone.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I want to start with a question on your role and vision. What was it that drew you to the role of Australian Business Champion for Indonesia?
Well, I've spent much of my career in business focusing on delivering sustainable growth for companies. I've worked with many companies supporting Australia's economy. I've been very focused on making sure that we're a successful economy. And now Southeast Asia is the fastest growing region in the world, highest rate of economic growth in history. And so I see our future growth and our prosperity in Australia linked to Southeast Asia. And of course, Indonesia, on Australia's doorstep, biggest economy in Southeast Asia. We say, neighbour by geography, partner by choice. And our Prime Minister says all the time, no country more important to Australia than Indonesia. So, when it came up as an opportunity from the Prime Minister to be that bridge between Australian business and Indonesian business and to do the business champion role, I absolutely had to say yes. I think our economies are massively complementary. I think the huge opportunities for Australian companies in Indonesia, for Indonesian companies in Australia. And I think it's also about making sure that we play our role collectively as two great economies in stability, in prosperity, in driving better living standards for our citizens.
Prime Minister Albanese and President Prabowo both agreed that it's time to review and expand the IA-CEPA. Now, from your perspective, what has the agreement delivered so far, and what opportunities remain untapped or underappreciated?
Well, of course, that agreement is Australia's most comprehensive and ambitious comprehensive economic partnership agreement. It shows how close the countries are. Australia eliminated all remaining tariffs on Indonesian imports into Australia since coming into force in 2020. that agreement, CEPA has underpinned a 200% increase in trade between Australia and Indonesia. Goods and services trade grew at Australian dollars by 17 billion in 2019 to 35 billion in 2024. Indonesia now exports more goods and services to Australia, recording a trade surplus with Australia of about 3 billion in 2024. Australian investment into Indonesia is also growing. Australians have invested on average Australian dollars of 722 million in Indonesia each year since the agreement came into force. I think the most important thing, though, is it provided a big signal to the business community in both countries to take a closer look at the opportunities available, particularly in areas like the education sector with my university, Western Sydney University, Deakin University, Monash University as cases in point. I think now it is time to refresh the agreement, and the big opportunities lie in areas like healthcare, infrastructure, agriculture, the resources sector, and education and skills.
Professor Westacott, in February, you led a high-level Australian business delegation to Jakarta, spanning healthcare, infrastructure, logistics, energy, mining, and resources. What are the most common concerns you hear from Australian businesses about engaging with Indonesia, and how can we help them move past those?
Well, I think a lot of these things, building awareness, I think a lot of challenges, outdated perceptions. They're the Indonesia of 25 years ago. And one of my jobs as business champion is, of course, to tackle those and turn those around. So the first thing I'm saying to Australian companies is to take a long-term view about Indonesia. Some companies pull out at the first hurdle. It may be about discovering incompatibility with a partner or a distributor, but perseverance is the key. And then, of course, working with trusted sources of advice, like Austrade, like the Australian-Indonesia Business Council, like Katalis, like all the great things that are in place, work with those institutions. And secondly, we need a mindset shift about Indonesia. As I said, it's evolved dramatically since the 1990s, since the Asian financial crisis. I need to make sure people are aware of how much Indonesia has changed and the incredible efforts that have been taken by the Indonesian government to strengthen its economic and political institutions to attract investors. For example, things like the Indonesian Investment Authority, now Antara, very, very good reforms that make it easy to do business. And the other big opportunity, I think, is making sure I'm really clear with Australian companies what I call the size of the prize is. Indonesia's economic growth has been between 5 and 6% in the last 3 decades. The President Prabowo has got an ambition for the economy to grow at 8%. That's an incredible rate of economic growth off a very big base. And so I want Australian companies to understand the big opportunity that awaits them. There are still risks and challenges of doing business, but to be frank, they exist in many markets, regulation, permitting, visas. I think the key is getting good partners, working with good institutions, getting people on the ground and staying the course.
Sectors like renewables, digital technology and education are showing great momentum and potential. What does meaningful strategic growth look like in these areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think strategic growth means going beyond transactions, going beyond just deals, albeit, part of the Southeast Asian strategies, the creation of these specialized deal teams. But it's about building enduring capability, sharing expertise and developing regional ecosystems. So, for example, in renewables, it's about joint investment in clean energy infrastructure, developing critical mineral supply chains, advancing technology transfers for green innovation. For digital, it's about creating interoperable systems, support digital upskilling, collaborating on cybersecurity, fintech, and AI and ethics in AI. And Australia has great capabilities here. In education, strategic growth involves cooperating around developing core curricula, embedding work-integrated learning so that students studying, say, at my university are getting work opportunities in Indonesia, and making sure that programs are industry responsive. We spend a lot of time in my campus in Surabaya talking to industry about what do they really need. Growth has to also be inclusive and sustainable if it's to be strategic. It's got to develop and benefit local communities. It's got to support women-led enterprises. It's got to support young people. It's got to support people in rural and emerging urban areas. It's got to be about those long-term sustainable goals. I think Australia and Indonesia can work together really effectively to support the development of a competitive electric vehicle ecosystems. There are many mining, equipment technology service providers in Australia already working in Indonesia, bringing that world-class technology, helping to grow that EV system. And for example, Katalis' initiative to bring in several Indonesian EV companies to Everything Electric event in Sydney last March, great example of this practice. And of course, in education, we just see really positive signs of being able to expand even further. But we've got to take that long-term strategic view. This is about building capability, not just doing an education transaction.
Staying on education, we are seeing more and more Australian universities, including Western Sydney and TAFEs, partnering with Indonesian institutions. Now, Katalis is proud to be playing an enabling role in these partnerships. What do you see is working well in that space, and where or what could we do more?
What's working well is that institution-to-institution partnership, where we're co-designing, co-delivering, making sure that we've got relevance and we've got local ownership. I think what's working well is the strong focus on skills-based training, especially in areas like hospitality, health, digital, such as onboarding 40 micro-credential courses to Indonesian digital platforms. Katalis has been instrumental in connecting stakeholders in de-risking new models of collaboration. What we could do more of? Well, the most obvious one is scaling up recognition of qualifications and micro-credentials to support lifelong learning. I think we can do more with deepening industry partnerships to embed applied learning in and boost that graduate employability. I think the area that we're really underdone is research, and that's in areas like energy transition, urban planning, public health. And I think the really big role is to create those two-way mobility opportunities, not just Indonesian students in Australia, but Australian students, researchers going to Indonesia. But we've really got to make sure that the system of education is kind of interoperable between the two countries, seamless between the two countries, that the qualifications are mutually recognised, and that we can see that mobility, and crucially, that we're working to make sure we've got industry placements.
How can we make sure that education and training meets real industry needs in both countries, especially in fast-growing areas like healthcare, aged care, and green energy?
I think it's a crucial question. The first thing is we've got to connect the tertiary institutions and the registered training organisations with industry providers so that we get those job-ready qualifications. And again, we kind of keep that two-way mobility. And I know a lot of work is being done in the aged care sector in relation to this. Businesses also need to talk to government to make sure regulations are meeting their needs about the ease of being able to move students around, create courses, get courses approved quickly. You know, the skills system is a very rapidly moving, dynamic system. We need to make sure that the creation of qualifications, the recognition of qualifications is done faster. And we've got to make sure that we stay in permanent and continuous structures with industry so that we can act in real time to develop the things they need.
Indonesia and Australia have incredibly complementary economies. What do you see as the most exciting opportunities for collaboration right now? And how can both small and medium enterprise get a foot in the door?
Well, I think that's a really important point. They are very complementary, and I make this point all the time to Australian companies. The things that Indonesia is growing are the things where Australia has great expertise. The things where Indonesia has great expertise are the things we need help with as well. So I think, you know, we can really drill off the scale, the ambition, the rapidly growing middle class in Indonesia. I see 6 main sectors where Australian investors are well positioned to make an impact, and Indonesian investors are well positioned to make an impact in Australia. Resources, healthcare, green energy transition, agriculture and food, infrastructure and education and skills. Now, for SMEs, getting a foot in the door, I think, means leveraging off the CEPA agreement and programs like Katalis to reduce those barriers to entry, tapping into those ecosystems, the accelerators, business councils, chambers of commerce. I think the whole initiative around women-led SMEs in Indonesia can contribute significantly to the economy. And in Australia, actually, they're the fastest growing segment in the SME market. But they do still face challenges in securing finance, accessing markets. So we must, I think, do a couple of things. We've got to equip people with the skills so that they can seize those opportunities. And we've got to work with financial institutions to make it easier for people to get capital. And then we've got to target investments in technology, education, trade facilitation, as well as services such as childcare, healthcare, so that women, particularly in that SME sector, can avail themselves of the opportunities. And I appreciate how Katalis is doing an incredible amount of work to support those SMEs. I think the other really crucial point about SMEs is when big businesses are successful, they need a lot of things in their supply chain. So if we can get things moving in those six sectors, we can get those ecosystems working, we can get the skilling up, the capability building, the institutional formation. You know, as with all economies, when big and small businesses work together, it's small business that really thrives.
Looking ahead to the next 5 years of the IA-CEPA, what do you see as the priorities? How do we make the bilateral partnerships more visible, more practical, and more inclusive?
Well, I think the first thing we need is a mindset shift from the agreement just being a trade agreement to becoming a living, evolving economic partnership that really kind of captures our shared interests and our shared ambitions. I think the agreement has set the foundation. Now we need more real world deals, partnerships, co-investments, particularly in those sectors like health, skills, clean energy, digital infrastructure. I think the relationships, though, are still the fundamental thing. Long-term B2B, P2P ties between business community, educational institutions, policymakers are all going to strengthen confidence and cooperations. And the agreement has to kind of move away from that transactional to that partnership. I think visibility is really important. We've got to amplify what's working, whether it's a TAFE partnership, whether it's my university taking 2 years, which is a record from the time we wanted to set up in Surabaya to the time we had students last year. We need those examples to inspire others. And I think we've got to always invest in inclusive growth, women-led businesses, young entrepreneurs, regional areas, and making sure that we're skilling and building the capabilities for the entire population so that people are all going to share the benefits of growth. And access and equity have got to be built in. We've got to make sure that what we're doing as Australian companies in Indonesia is absolutely about Indonesia's long-term prosperity, and similarly here in Australia. It's got to be to the mutual benefit of both countries. And so that access, equity, building capability, making sure we're looking after sustainability, all of those things need to underpin the review of the agreement.
No, it wouldn't be complete if we don't get to ask you a few quick, fun questions to wrap up. Now, what's the one place in Indonesia that left a strong impression on you?
You know, it's tempting to say traffic, but it does leave an impression on you and it tends to last longer than you want it to. But look, what I think is really incredible is just the dynamism of the economy, just the kind of what's happening in terms of growth, in the maturity of the economy, the maturing of the infrastructure, the maturing of the relationships. And of course, the thing that always impresses me about Indonesia is how beautiful it is. You know, Australians love a good landscape. I'm always impressed whenever I go down to Surabaya and I get to play golf near the volcanoes or one of the great golf courses down there. It's a truly beautiful place. Final thing, people are so friendly. You don't travel to every part of the world. People are super friendly. People are super friendly.
And your go-to coffee spot in Indonesia?
I don't drink coffee, unfortunately, so I can't answer that question because I've never actually had a cup of coffee. So, but I can certainly say I adore Indonesian food. If I lived in Indonesia, I'd be a lot chubbier because when I go down to the breakfast at the hotel, I just can't stop trying little things. I don't drink coffee.
Now, I was just going to ask you, what is your favorite Indonesian food? Are you more a gado-gado type or nasi goreng type?
Oh, rendang, a really good Indonesian rendang, beef rendang, and of course the Indonesian satays. There's something about an Indonesian beef rendang that kind of richer, darker, deep flavour of an Indonesian rendang. You just can't beat that anywhere in the world.
Professor, we might have to get you to William Wongsaw's house. I'll get him to cook a rendang for us, because we interviewed William Wongsaw through Sondang, and the world's best, most renowned rendang chef, who's just phenomenal. So it's probably might have to get you next time in Jakarta.
Now that's somewhere I have to go, because I search for the optimal rendang all over Sydney and Melbourne. I've only found one that's sort of approximate once, but and I've tried to make it myself, and I did not a bad job. But yeah, I'm very keen to eat a perfect Indonesian rendang curry.
Take from me, it's unbelievable. It's phenomenal. It's something you have to try, So
I'm very keen to do it.
The most surprising thing you've learned about doing business in Indonesia?
Well, my own experience at the university was how easy it was. I mean, look, where there were people wanted to help. That was the thing that really struck me when we opened our campus in Surabaya, and the acting governor turned up. They were so proud of our university. And every time I meet with officials, people want to help. They want Australia to do business. They want Australians to be there. They love Australia. And so, that's my message to companies. This is a welcome mat that you've never seen before. Take advantage of it.
And what's the one word that sums up the Australia-Indonesia relationship?
I think it's friendship. I think we've moved from that transactional relationship to a friendship. And, it's no coincidence that the first visit our Prime Minister did when he was re-elected was straight to Indonesia. I don't even think much of a week had gone by before he was over there, making sure that this really important relationship, this friendship, and our partner by choice is strengthened.
And finally, in reflection, what gives you the most hope for the future of the Australia-Indonesia relationship?
First of all, opportunity, the mutuality, as you say, the complementarity, I think is just incredible. And so I think that it's going to be easy to kind of find those areas. I think the willingness that both countries have to kind of try and make sure that we break down the trade barriers. And I think the other thing that gives me hope is that our government has put in place a fantastic Southeast Asian strategy under the leadership of one of our most prominent business leaders, Nicholas Moore. And we've now got really important institutions. We've got a $2 billion financing fund. We've got, over $200 million on climate initiatives. We've got organizations like Katalis who are kind of working hard to drive those partnerships. And then we've got these dedicated deal teams in our embassies in Jakarta, in Vietnam, who are there on the ground doing these deals. And the other thing that gives me hope is just, as I said, whenever I meet an Indonesian minister, whenever I meet someone from the Indonesian business community, the willingness, the excitement about Australian investment is just so high. And then these new institutional arrangements, Antara, the Indonesian Investment Authority, all of these things coming together, plus the review of the CEPA agreement, I think that we should be looking at 25, 30, 40 years of incredible prosperity between the two countries.
And just lastly, what is one thing you would like our listeners to take after from this conversation?
Don't underestimate the opportunity. Don't underestimate the shared values that are going to be needed to drive it. Don't underestimate that this is a strategic imperative economically, socially, geographically. Now's the time to engage. Whether you're a business owner, educator, policymaker, don't leave this too late. And the final message that I want people to take away is don't think about quick wins. Don't think about just one transaction. Think about patience. Think about partnership. Think about that investment mindset that's about shared ambition, shared understanding. Be curious, be bold. The future belongs to the people who are bold. Get outside their comfort zone, but the future always belongs to people who take the long-term approach. And the future is built by people. So every connection, every conversation, every collaboration matters. You can be part of this great story. We can be part of it together as countries, and our two countries will thrive as a result.
Thank you again for joining us, especially during this important anniversary year for IA-CEPA.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
That's a wrap on our conversation with Professor Jennifer Westacott AC, Australian Business Champion for Indonesia. We hope you found it as interesting and insightful as we did. If you enjoyed this episode, this season, or this show, please share, leave a review, and stay connected with Katalis for more stories from the Australia-Indonesia relationship. On behalf of the crew of the Katalis Podcast, I'm Robbie Gaspar.
And I'm Sondang Sirait, signing out for now. We look forward to you joining us again for the next season of the Katalis Podcast.
Katalis is a unique 5-year government-backed business development program that unlocks the vast potential of economic partnerships between Australia and Indonesia.